My name's Dr. Colin Robertson and I'm an exercise and nutrition scientist. I've spent the past 28 years working in high performance sport. I've worked across 4 Olympic cycles, supporting athletes who competed at Beijing, London, Rio, Tokyo. I've worked in international and national rugby, premiership football, and I'm an environmental physiologist. So I've supported people who've climbed Everest, rowed across the Atlantic Ocean, taken on marathons across the Sahara Desert, trekked to the North Pole. And I've also got a clinical exercise physiology background. So I've supported the rehabilitation and the treatment of people who are undergoing care for cancer, cardiovascular disease, pulmonary conditions, and anything that would typically take a person into a hospital environment. But today, I'm the Chief Product Officer for Zinzino. And that's a journey that really started about 2 years ago, April 2020, when at that time I was working as a researcher as a part of a health strategy, a national health strategy, which actually informed the city's change in diabetes global health strategy also. And what I was looking at, what I was tasked to address, was the notion of the omega-3 deficiency and what we could do to start to address the fact that even as the World Health Organization have published, approximately 6 billion people on the planet are considered to be deficient in what is an essential nutrient, an essential fat, that omega-3. And I'd diligently gone through the research and looked at what could be the solution to this problem. The obvious solution is that every single person eats more fatty fish, but there is a problem with that. It has to be line-caught, fresh, fatty fish in order for it to be nutrient dense enough to hit the kind of values we need to make sure a person is sufficiently primed with those essential marine omega-3s. The second obvious thing would be to say, well, let's look at the fish oil industry. It's well established, it's global, and that would make sense. But sadly, there was a Cochrane study, a meta-analysis, high-impact peer-reviewed research article 2018, that concluded that the fish oil industry, fish oil itself, simply didn't bring about enough of a change. It was failing in its task. And so as I was preparing this document and I was starting to scratch my head and wonder, well, what is the solution to this? A phone call came through. And it's really rare when I'm working on something, in my study, working away on a task, that I'll answer a call. But this was an old friend of mine, someone who at that time was very high up in an American clothing brand called Under Armour. And we went back a long way, and he gave me a call. And so I answered it. I was looking for a distraction. And as fate would have it, as I answered the call, he said to me, Colin, what do you know about omega-3? And have you ever heard of a company called Zinzino? And I said, well, funnily enough, right now I currently know quite a lot about omega-3, but no, I've never heard of Zinzino. And I said to him, but if they're selling fish oil, let me tell you, it won't work. And he said, well, no, I've been told this is different. Now, my friend had some health issues in the past. And so he'd been recommended by a medical practitioner to take this product and wanted me to verify it because we were friends and he trusted me with regards to my nutritional background to really rubber stamp it and say, yeah, this is going to be something that could help. Now, I don't look at every kind of food that friends of mine ask me to chase up because time is short and I've got a job and a family. But in this instance, because it was omega-3 related, it kind of piqued my curiosity. And I took some time to go and have a look. And this was a moment for me that was a eureka moment because I went onto the webpage, I brought up the product, and the missing piece fell into place. And the simplicity of it was genius, to such an extent that I thought, why did I not think of this? What they had done was reattached what nature intended. But I'll come back to that in a moment. The key part was, for the first time, I'd moved from a position of thinking, what is the solution for this? We've got nearly 8 billion people living on the planet. We know we can't provide this through simple food choices. One, there's a task in getting people to change behaviors. Secondly, there is a whole ecological and ethical issue around that notion of pulling that amount of fish out the sea. And to do that where everyone is single fresh and it's wild and line caught, not going to happen. And we knew that there was an industry that just didn't hit the mark. And then I recognized what the solution was. Further to this, there was a test. And this actually really made me quite cynical. And I started to be quite skeptical, because it's the oldest trick in the book, is that, it's the snake oil industry. What happens is I measure you, you're obviously wrong, something's not working. I give you a solution, and then I measure again and everything's great. And so I was quite concerned that there was this notion of a test. But then I looked at who actually delivered the test. And for someone like me who works in the research arena, global research arena, and at this time I was a lab director myself of laboratories in Greater Manchester, I know the network. And when I saw the name was Vitas of Norway, who are arguably one of the most esteemed, recognized independent labs in the world, who are partnered with the University of Oxford, Cambridge, Stanford, Harvard, who've worked with the NHS in the UK, I thought, this is interesting, because that's a big claim to make. And so in my capacity as someone who was a lab director, I gave them a call. And I said, I've just happened upon a website of a company called Zinzino, who claim that you independently analyze and report on their dry blood spot samples with regards to the fatty acid profile. To which they said, yes, they're one of our best customers. And that was the moment that I realized that my friend's phone call was quite fortuitous, that it steered me towards something that was very much a workable solution, and something that I wanted to know more about. A lot happened in between. But within those 2 years, I went from really being focused and having dedicated my life to that notion of research and how we can build strategy, to now proudly being the chief product officer of a company that provides a workable solution. But what I want to do is really set the scene, establish why it is we need to consider this, where we are in the 21st century when it comes to our health, what is the case of need, and how we can best address that through food choices, through behavior, through activity and exercise, but also, importantly, through strategic and intelligent supplementation. Right from the start, supplementation should supplement your diet. But you don't need to transform your diet before you start to effectively supplement. And in fact, I would state that for most people, the best place to start is with the supplement. But let's go back a little bit further first. 3 years ago, when myself and colleagues like mine discussed preventative care, some of our colleagues who were more medical based, focused, took quite a cynical approach towards that, because the model is simple. Something goes wrong and they fix it. You break something, they patch it up, they help it to repair. You get a condition, you get a disease, you get an illness, they give you a pill, they give you a medication. So you fix things when they're broken. But because largely the past 2 years of the global pandemic, and what that made health services all around the world realize, is that we need to go back upstream. We need to stop people getting sick in the first place. Because there was lots to learn from the pandemic. But one of the key things that we've learned all across the health sector is that too many people were vulnerable. Too many people were vulnerable to a virus who shouldn't have been. That's not a controversial thing to say. I'm not trying to provoke anybody. It's just simply a fact. We have too many people who are vulnerable who shouldn't be, who, if they took an attitude of owning their own health, who took more preventative steps, could avoid and reduce the risk of these things, and therefore have a far more robust sense of self, and particularly with regards to their immune function. And therefore, yes, probably pick up the infection, but like lots of infections, be able to deal with it. Maybe have a few days where they don't feel great, but then move back on. And that's how the majority of people should have been. We shouldn't have had so many people at risk. And so now preventative health and preventative measures are top line concern for medical boards everywhere. We've learned from the pandemic. We need to do things differently. But I think also people have learned. People don't like to feel vulnerable, quite rightly so. And people now are far more health-centric than they've ever been. Reports from every country around the world is showing that people now are far more invested and interested in their own health and having a better quality of life because of better health than ever before. And so we need to seize the moment, but the moment we need to seize is to give people solid, reliable, evidence-based information so that they can do things well from the start and avoid the fads and the hacks and the gimmicks. Not go down those paths, but actually start to build towards meaningful, sustainable behaviors that will carry them over a health span that matches their lifespan. But let's go back a step further, because what we have currently is a lot of people in the world living with compromised immune function. And here we can see all of the many things that contribute towards what we call an increased immunological load. So too much bearing down on the immune system for all of the time. But when we look at these factors that contribute towards a compromised immune function, we also get an insight to how the world really is in the 21st century. And if we start from this sedentary indoor lifestyle and a lack of sun UV exposure, sedentary behavior has increased decade on decade, which is crazy because we are a migratory species. We've evolved to move. And in fact, if we couldn't have moved, we wouldn't have evolved. 6 million years is our evolutionary trace, 350,000 in our current form. If we couldn't have moved, we wouldn't have survived. Movement is a fundamental aspect of being human. And yet in the 21st century, we're doing less and less of it as each year goes by. And this comes at a health consequence. When we move, every part of the system is enhanced. Movement is medicine, and yet we're doing less and less. And in fact, statistics from around the world that have shown that through lockdown, there was an increase in sedentary behavior of average 14 hours per week, which is on top of already high amounts of sedentary behavior. So we need to break this mold. We need to get people to move. Then we look at diets. Sadly, the modern westernized diet, which most of us are surrounded by nowadays, is 65 to 80% ultra-processed, processed foods and takeaway foods. We have a saying in nutrition, which is the 80-20 rule. If 80% of what you eat and consume is good, nutritious, working for you, then that 20%, well, that allows you to have a treat. You can have that dessert after a meal. You can have that chocolate biscuit at break time once in a while. But in fact, currently, most people in the world have got that model the wrong way around. 80% of what they do is working against them. They have energy high, nutritionally low foods on a daily basis. And that comes at a cost and leads into the next point and adds to the point after that, which we see common nutrient deficiencies. So in a time of food wealth, billions of people, when we analysed, have nutritional deficiencies. That doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense. But it does in reality, because we know that diets are low in vegetables and fruit, and therefore low in minerals and vitamins. And so we have this complex issue of massive amounts of food availability, but most of what people consume only provides energy and comes at a different type of health cost. Chronic stress. The world is a stressful place, and we're not going to delve into that in this presentation. But not just what's happening globally, the big things that move around us. Life in the 21st century is challenging. It's fast-paced. We're constantly on the go. There is always something demanding our attention. There are standards in place, the way in which we work, the way in which we engage. There are multiple levels that add stress to our day. And this has a knock-on consequence to sleep disturbances. Sleep disturbances and deprivation was kind of one of the pandemics before the pandemic. Year on year, people reporting less and less sleep and less quality of sleep. You are a diurnal species. You are designed to function throughout the day and sleep at night. Sleep is a huge component of who and what you are. When we sleep, the body repairs itself, it remolds itself, we commit things to memory. It has cognitive as well as biological benefits, and it makes us come new the next day. And when we compromise that, we are literally compromising who we are the next day, day in, day out. And this comes at a great health cost once we've been in this cycle for too long. Alcohol consumption It's the #1 used recreational drug in the world. Every single study that has investigated alcohol consumption has concluded that no matter how little you have, a reduction always improves health. But let's remember, life is short, it's a short ride, and we need to add joy to the experience. And this again is not an alcohol counseling session, but I have 2 rules that I think will benefit most people. 1, only drink alcohol when you're in a good mood. That's a primary rule. Secondly, never drink alcohol when you're on your own. If you live by those 2 rules, you're probably going to have a healthier relationship with alcohol, and it will add to the joy of the experience of being alive rather than detract. And the third part I'd say about alcohol is that greater minds than ours have looked into those glasses and bottles and looked for answers and never found any. It's not the place if you've got troubles. So stick to the first 2 rules, only when you're happy and only when you're with friends or family. Age, sadly, is always working against us. As we age, once we reach full maturation, which is approximately age 21, then we start the aging process. Cellular turnover starts very gradually to reduce down. That's working against us with regards to our health. And in fact, some health conditions are called conditions of old age. So we need to consider, are the things we're doing, are the choices we're making, are they advancing the aging process, or are they keeping the aging process at the rate that it should go by? Personally, I'm not a huge advocate of this kind of anti-aging idea. There is some evidence in that area, but I believe the best evidence is whereby we just make sure we age at the right rate. And when we do so, we're in great shape. Let's not contribute towards advancing the aging process. Increased risk of infection when our immune function is compromised. But also consider this, when we have a continual immune load, so the body feels like it's constantly working against something, it's difficult for it to cope with anything else that comes your way. And so little things like the common cold can have quite a profound impact purely because the immune system is already struggling. It's already trying to deal with a lot. It's under a lot of load. And we're going to come to a part in a moment that discusses, well, how the immune function needs to work and what needs to be there in order for it to function optimally, which is normally, and why those vitamins and minerals are so important. Here we have a model which shows our innate immunity and our acquired immunity. And these are aspects of your immune system. Your innate immunity is what nature gave you. It gave you a fighting chance. As you came into this world, you were ready to take it on. You had a certain amount of defense, again, inherited through those genetic factors, through our evolutionary track. And there they are at the side. This gets you started. But on the right, we have our acquired immunity. And what influences this is the dirt you play in as a child, the food you eat, the air you breathe, the things that you drink, everything that you engage with on earth starts to shape your acquired immunity. You build up antibodies, responses, defenses through exposure to certain agents and pathogens, things that come our way. But as we look through this and we see that there are T cells and there are B lymphocytes, and we see this real interaction of how things are prompted, stimulated to response in order for your immune system, which is a work of miraculous nature, to defend you as best it possibly can. We realize that there are key parts of this that rely on certain amounts of types of communication. And much of this communication is derived through your diet. This is where those vitamins and minerals come in. So in order for those T cells and B cells, and we're trying to keep this as simple as we can for the purpose of this presentation, in order for those to be triggered, to be stimulated, for them to respond and do what it is they need to do, well, we need to have the letters of the alphabet of the language that your biology speaks with. And let's look at some of those simple aspects now. And these are just some of the basics. And what I've selected here are just some of the top vitamins that I know most people are aware of. So we have vitamin E, we have vitamin D, and we have vitamin C. And what we can see here is how this is implicated in both your innate immunity and your adaptive immunity. So that you're born with and how you've kind of evolved through your engagement with the world. And we see that there are key aspects of immune function, those macrophages, those dendritic cells, those natural killer cells, and then into the adaptive part, the B cell, T cell production, that rely on the presence of these letters, these vitamins. Imagine if I asked you to write a novel. Imagine if I asked you to write the story of your life, but you're not allowed to use any word that has the letter E, D, or C in it. How is that going to limit your choice? How is that going to limit your power of communication? But let's add some more vitamins in there. Let's say you can't use words with the letter K. You can't use words with the letter A. You can't use words with the letter B. How many words are you left with that you can communicate with? And this is what happens when we have nutritional deficiencies. Key components of your body's communication system are missing. And so things don't happen. They either are compromised in how they happen, or they don't happen at all. And this is really when we start to look at why nutrition is such an important component of immune function. Your immunity, the quality of your immunity, is directly linked to the quality of your diet, ensuring that it is nutritionally served so that you have sufficient amounts to support the normal function of your immune system. It's critical, it's key, but sadly, too much of the conversation around food for the past 80 years has centered on calories, purely considering the energy content and requirements and makeup of a food source, which has a place for sure, but actually that's second to the quality of the things that we eat. Those nutrients form the communication, not the energy. That's a different need and a different set of demands. And so we see here, if we want B cell and T cell production, and these actually work in a way that's really incredibly clever and intelligent. This is like your early warning system. So when you've encountered a type of virus or an illness or a pathogen once, and the body remembers this, builds up an antibody defense, and then has these cells about to detect them should they occur again, to recognize what's going on and respond accordingly and deal with it. So when they're not there, your defenses are down. You are vulnerable to whatever comes next. You are vulnerable to re-exposure, even to something that you've had before. And so sometimes a person can be exposed to a type of infection, but not actually effectively build up a meaningful antibody response, simply because the language of communication isn't there to make it happen. And this is just the basics. It goes far more in depth than this. But let's have a look at the health consequences of a comprised immune function. This is from the World Health Organization. And the reason why I've included the top 13 and not stopped at the top 10, which is more typical, is because the top 10 includes all those things that I would imagine you would expect to see. So we see all-cause death mortality. We see things like type 2 diabetes. And it should be noted that type 2 diabetes is recognized as a pandemic, and it has been for some years now. And the rates of type 2 diabetes are increasing year on year. In fact, in the UK, there wasn't a single reported case of a child with type 2 diabetes up until 2002. And now it makes up to 15% of all new diagnoses. This is a lifestyle disease. This is a lifestyle condition. This is something that preventative health can stop. We can actually put an end to this by making better choices. But what I want to draw your attention to on this list is actually items 11, 12, and 13. And that's why my list didn't stop at the typical top 10, is because when we look at 11, 12, and 13, we see the early signs of a compromised immune system, of compromised immune function. And in my experience, which is nearly 3 decades long now, of operating in the health space, these are the things that people cope with and tolerate for a long time, because our migration towards more severe health consequences doesn't happen overnight. It's not something that happens the next day. It's something that we slowly move towards in most instances. And the early signs, something like body pain, difficulty with physical functioning. And we're not talking about somebody who has a diagnosed condition here or has suffered any kind of physical trauma. We're just talking about the general aches and pains that people experience and limited function. And they think it's normal, and they think it's normal because it's become so common. One of the things I find fascinating in the 21st century is that there are people who leave their home every single day and take with them pain-killing medication just in case they experience pain that day, either for a migraine, a headache, a joint pain, a back pain. They leave the house armed with their own pharmacy. They might take anti-inflammatories, which is, we've seen year on year increase in the amount of people who buy and use those medications. What's also interesting is that we've normalized and we're comfortable that if we go to work or school or the place we need to be and we have a headache or we experience some discomfort and we don't have any, we're really comfortable now asking our colleagues or friends to give us some of their drugs to manage pain. This is not normal. If this had been part of our evolutionary track, I don't think we'd be here. But we've normalized it. We have language that says this is what happens as we get older. It doesn't. This isn't something that is directly linked to age. It's directly linked to behavior. It's directly linked to nutritional, dietary behavior and choices, physical activity, how much we move, and our exercise regimes. That's what leads to this. And also, as we move up the list then, mental illness, another circumstance that is pandemic in its reach. In modern times, when people generally, particularly across those industrialized nations, have never had so much, people have also never been so sad, so unhappy. We have a mental health crisis going on in the world. And this will impact, all of this impacts on this notion of low quality of life. When we have such abundance, and yet people are expressing repeatedly such low satisfaction and low quality of life. So these are the signs that I think a lot of people would do well to recognize. Because the minute we get told about one of the more serious ones, it's diagnosable, people start to react and respond, and actually at that point, we've missed our preventative part. Once it's diagnosed, we're in corrective, we're in medical, it's going to be treated. But if we can start to switch on and recognize and identify those early warning signs, we can tap the brakes and we can start to do something about it. We should see this as empowering. We should see this as the sign that we need to do something different and we need to do something better. And we need to find a solution that's going to work with us and for us and not require us to overnight transform our whole lives. And you know why? Because when people try to do that, they typically fail. Only the minority, let me assure you, only the minority are capable of making whole stock nutritional lifestyle changes and maintaining them. Most people go through a cycle of compliance, failure, dropout, and then they find a different rhythm and try that one. And over time, they get demoralized. It hasn't worked for them. And actually what we see is a continuing spiral into poor health. So what we need in reality, rather than preaching to people about the highest standard of virtues of what should be done if we were perfect, is recognize that perfection is an illusion and we should all work towards improvement. And we should have things that work with us and not demand us to become something that we're not. But we'll come back to that in a little while. So here are some things that a lot of people will say, and I want to take this opportunity to assure you that they're simply not true. Let's ground things. Let's keep things in reality. So here are the fiction that align themselves to nutrition. It's fiction to say that good nutrition will block all illness. That's simply not true. Taking vitamin D will stop you getting COVID-19. That's just not true. Taking vitamin C will stop you getting cancer. There is no consensus or evidence to support that statement. And taking omega-3 boosts your immunity. Let me take this opportunity now to say nothing boosts your immunity. When your immune system is functioning normally, that in itself is a miracle of evolution and nature, and it is phenomenal. And all we need to do is support it to do what it's designed to do. We don't need to boost things and use glamorous language. What we need to do is boost the amount of nutrients we have so that it can do its job normally. That's where that language should be used more appropriately. The facts are this: good nutrition helps to prevent non-communicable diseases. So good nutrition is right at the heart of reducing your risk of developing a lifestyle disease. And that could be cancer, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes. There is a whole host of conditions that people think that it's either luck or fate that bring them their way, that simply aren't. We have so much power and influence over what happens there and managing our levels of risk. Taking vitamin D will support the normal function of your immune system, for fact. Taking vitamin C will support the normal function of your immune system, for fact. It's a part of that communication that we discussed a moment ago. The omega-6-3 balance, so omega-6 and omega-3, this balance at a cellular level, well, this optimizes health and allows for the normal function of your immune system. I want to make a case really clear, because I'm concerned that as I discuss omega-3, you might start to think that omega-6 is the bad guy in the situation. It's not. Omega-6, omega-3, 7, 9, these are the essential fats. Think about that for a moment. These are the polyunsaturated fatty acids, the essential fats. So what we mean by that is they're not optional. They're not if you feel like having them. They are essential. Very rare we use that word. We have the essential fats, we have the essential amino acids. Both of these things make up who and what you are. Omega-6 is an essential fat. The problem we have with omega-6 is it overwhelms our diet. We have just way too much of it. And that's because of the processed food capacity to feed our diets, literally. And they use a lot of omega-6s. But omega-6 is really important. If you cut your finger, if you fall over a step, if you have an infection, it's omega-6 that regulates the inflammatory response. It sends those inflammatory markers up, signals for our immune system to start to respond. And what happens, as you can see on this diagram, as you move through, the omega-6s raise the inflammatory markers. The inflammation is an essential part of the recovery process, and this leads to effective healing. The problem we have, though, is with diets that are overwhelmed with omega-6 and diets that have a deficiency, a common deficiency. Remember, World Health Organization estimates that 6 billion people on the planet have an omega-3 deficiency. Then we are living in a constant inflamed state. Our inflammatory markers are continually high. And what this means in real terms is that our body feels like it's in a viral condition all of the time. So our immunological load is consistently high. We covered that right at the start of this presentation. Our immunological load is high. We're in an inflamed state constantly. And when we add further inflammation to that because of a cut, a trip, a fall, an infection, then simply a system that's already under stress just can't cope. And we've seen that happen repeatedly and consistently. This is why people who develop one type of comorbidity, so let's say for instance they are overweight, which leads to obesity, which leads to type 2 diabetes, from this point it's about what's going to happen next, what's going to be the next disease. And it's very common for people to develop cardiovascular disease, to have a stroke, to take them towards different types of cancers. And so it's important that we get back to that preventative sense of how we can tap the brakes. We can stop this from happening by controlling our inflammatory response. So let's look at what brings about a change in that inflammatory state. So omega-3 are a vital component when it comes to our cell membrane, and it's renowned for its anti-inflammatory properties. It should also be recognized there are different types of the omega-3. The one that people are deficient in most commonly are the marine-based omega-3s, which is the DHA and the EPA. And we can either get that from that really good line-caught fatty fish, salmon, mackerel, tuna, anchovies, or we can get it from the sea algae, because that's where the fish get it from. That's the path that we take it from. DHA makes up 60% of the fat around the brain. So there are huge neurological and cognitive consequences to having a deficiency in omega-3 too. And this is particularly important for child development, both in the womb and in the early years, and therefore has a huge importance for pregnant women. But throughout life, these essential fats play an active role in these cognitive, neurological, and immunological components and factors. The EPA is the one that's more aligned to the control of the inflammatory state. We are not meant to be in an inflamed state all of the time. The inflammatory response should be because of an infection, because of a cut, because of a trip, because of a fall, and not our normal state. And the way to offload that immunological load is to have a control of our inflammatory condition. And so the presence of the omega-3 within the cell and as a total amount of fat is a huge part of achieving that. Again, if you go and have a look at the data, and the easy way to access this is through the World Health Organization pages, you will see that the total fats that make you up, if they are above 8%, 8 to 10% of that is the omega-3, then you are in the lowest risk category for the development of a non-communicable disease. Your inflammatory markers are low. The state of your cell is optimized. This is really, really important because a healthy cell, and remember, that's what you are. You are a collection of billions of cells. That makes up who and what you are in this lifetime. If you're not right at a cellular level, you're not right at any level, because that's what you're made of. So a healthy cell, it's malleable, it's dynamic, it's fluid, nutrients can get in and toxins can get out. A bit like how we should be. We should be able to get nutrients in and toxins out effectively. Sadly, that's not often the case. But that's certainly how the cell should function. And when omega-3 is present within the cell, and when we have the right ratio, which I'll come to in a moment, of omega-6 and omega-3, that's how the cell is, and that's how it functions, and that's how it performs. And those inflammatory markers, those inflammatory cytokines, they are low. They're kept at bay. So that when called upon to trigger a response, omega-6 can do its job. So it's really important from the context and the perspective of ensuring that the very stuff you're made of is in the best condition it can be in. When we look at this ratio, and we need to talk about this more, because within the cell, we need to have less than 4:1, omega-6 to omega-3. Ideally, less than 3:1 to really start to optimize cellular health. We want to be beneath that 3:1. But when we take analysis from all over the world, and you'll see this writ large across the research, on average, you'll see across Western Europe, you'll see 15:1 omega-6 to 3. Which is indicative of a pro-inflammatory state. These individuals are inflamed, and we see this in above 97% of the population. In areas of the US, we consistently see 25:1, and we see variation all across the globe, some better, some worse, but the average that we see is around about 15:1. So the average person, if such a thing exists, is in a pro-inflammatory state for most of their life. Because this ratio is wrong. They simply get too much omega-6 through the diet and nowhere near enough of the omega-3. That's at the cellular level. That needs to be corrected at that level so we can control the environment. The index, which is the total amount, is the one that therefore then correlates to all risk with regards to non-communicable diseases. But when your index is 8 to 10%, then your cellular ratio will be beneath that 4:1, 3:1, and where exactly it needs to be. So these work in harmony. The simple fact is we need to get more of it into the system, because this plays a proactive part also in other immune function aspects and is a part of that immune communication system that enables your body to do what it needs to do. So it's not just about the cell being able to take on the nutrients and get the toxins out. It actually plays a proactive biochemical role in supporting immune function. So this brings us to this statement: quality versus quantity. Our bodies do a lot more than just simply burn calories. Our interactions with food shape who and what we are, and the quality of our health is directly correlated with the quality of our diet. Back in the 1950s, the world started to get taught about calories and how to really understand the new food, which was the onset of the processed food industry, which was energy high, nutrient low. And it's only in all reality become more so. And so we've had a world now that has been counting calories for decade after decade. But throughout that time, we've had a world that has consistently every decade become more overweight and obese, that consistently every decade has seen an increase in lifestyle diseases that are directly associated with a low quality diet. And this is despite our advances technologically, scientifically, medically, through what we can detect. Despite all of that, global societies are getting sicker, decade on decade. And so what we need to do is take personal accountability, because if one by one we start to do things differently, then we can start to do things differently all around the world. But we need to accept this fact. For sure, the amount of energy you consume is important, but that's actually the easy part of the equation. Might not be in practice, starting to reduce down if need be to manage your weight more effectively, but it's really simple. When you start to make a shift towards greater quality foods, more whole foods, then actually, because you're relying less on processed foods, the energy component pretty much starts to take care of itself. But there are issues around achieving this when purely an approach is taken that looks at whole food and whole food availability. And for us, our solution, and it is a solution, and it's an effective and powerful solution, is our health protocol. And it starts with a test. That test I told you about right at the start. That test that I wanted to be verified, that I wanted to make sure was a real test, housed by VTES, which is an analysis of your essential fatty acid profile, that tells us the ratio of your 6-3 within the cell, that tells us your index as to where it actually is, and therefore informs you on whether or not you need to do something different. Most people do. And the solution for that is the balance oil. And the reason why balance oil works where fish oil doesn't is because of that genius step of bringing it back aligned with nature, reattaching the polyphenol. The virgin olive oil, high phytonutrient, acts as a chaperone, and it's anti-inflammatory. It protects the omega-3 from the air. It compromises omega-3, they start to go off. That explains a lot of the smell. The heat of our body, as we start to digest those foods, compromises it even further. And here we have a protected source of omega-3, the DHA and the EPA, in a powerful anti-inflammatory polyphenol. So you get a chaperone that carries it through so it can be active within the cell. And also, there's not a doctor in the world that doesn't recommend people to have a teaspoon of virgin olive oil every day just because of its anti-inflammatory properties. Well, there it is. And within there is the required dosage based on your body weight of how much omega-3 you need on a daily basis to make sure that your 6-3 is less than 3-1, that your index is above 8%, which means that you don't need to go and find fresh, fatty, line-core fish every single day of the week in order to make sure that you have sufficient amounts. And in there is already a dose to get you started of vitamin D. So we balance the system. And the thing is once you start to make a positive change and once things start to improve, what we see is then improvement and positive change starts to become a normal part of how we move forward. To date, we have independently analysed and assessed over 830,000 dry blood spot samples with regards to the fatty acid profile. And we know it's the largest database of its type in the world. In fact, right now, Professor Angela Rizzo of the Milan Institute is analysing that data for peer review. We're going to share this information with the world to better inform the world with regards to what can happen when we get things right. Because what we see is across the world, and we are global, over 97% of people have a deficiency. They have a ratio of 6-3 within the cell that is above 14-1 and an index that is less than 4%. So high risk of non-communicable disease and poor cellular health, a pro-inflammatory environment. But we also know that over 98% of people correct that within 120 days using balance oil. And the reason being, as I've already explained, as to how the mechanism of that product works. And we see that change because it takes approximately 120 days for your red blood cells to turn over and for you to have a brand new batch. So by the time we get to 120 days, plus or minus 5 to 10 days, there's a little bit of individual variation, we have a new you. We can look at your new fatty acid profile and see what's changed. The remaining couple of percent change over just a slightly longer period of time because there are always individual variances. But we know we have the only proven product that meaningfully changes omega-3 status. This is a solution to a real world problem. This is a solution to that 6 billion people identified by the World Health Organization who are living with an omega-3 deficiency. Powerful products that are actually powerful solutions, that are actually real world solutions for real world problems that will take us forward confidently and mindfully of the ecological sustainability limitations that are abound in the modern world. We can literally transform health. This is our antidote to the modern health behavior in 3 simple steps. But to do this, to make this change, we need to make a change up here. We have to change our thinking to change our behavior. And now I'm going to go back to my kind of sporting roots of having worked in high performance sport with a couple of quotes. And we use this a lot in sport. And I think it has merit to everybody. If you always do what you've always done, then you'll always get what you've always had. Often people hold themselves back through doubt and they start to think, well, is this for me? Is this right? And there's a lot of mixed information. You need to start to reshape your ideas. You need to start to empower yourself through a positive decision and surrender yourself to the prospect and the possibility of what could go right. The science speaks for itself. That's intact. We know the situation, we know the problem, and we also know the solution. All we've got to do now is commit to those first few steps, not the full journey, the first few steps. Challenge ourselves to do something differently. Because the definition of insanity is to repeat the same process and expect a different outcome. That goes back to the first quote. If what you're doing has got you where you are, and where you are is not where you need to be, then you need to bring about a change. And we have a model of change behavior, which is that our beliefs shape our intentions and our intentions shape our behaviors. But this relies on what level of control we feel we have. And control is powerful. And for somebody to say, I don't have the control to buy fresh, fatty fish every single day and make that a feature of my diet, of how I behave every single day, either because of budget issues, because of access issues, and because the reality is it's hard to access that type of quality of fish. Well, you might therefore recognize that you have control over a different approach. And this is where supplementation, and remember, supplementation should supplement the diet, not replace it. But this is where it comes into its own. This is where you can intelligently supplement to make a positive change. If you're one of those people who struggles to get enough fruit and vegetables in on a daily basis to hit those marks with regards to vitamins, minerals, and dietary fibers, maybe what you can commit to is taking a scoop of something in water and drinking that once a day. And again, if you are those kind of people who struggle because of whatever reason to get simply sufficient amount of nutrition in your diet, maybe you can control taking 1 capsule or 2 that tops up those levels of essential vitamins and minerals. Then this becomes a new norm. This shapes a new attitude, which informs your beliefs, which changes your intentions and alters your behavior. The way to restart your body is not to shock it, it's not to overhaul it, not to suddenly dramatically do something remarkably different. The way to restart your body is to correct yourself and balance yourself at a cellular level. It's to nurture that gut microbiota so that your immune system can work on your behalf. And the way to restart your body is to give it the alphabet of the language it needs to speak so it can start to speak better for you.